good evening, and welcome. I'm Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where it's been a while, actually, since I've done one of these, I think, because I've missed the last couple, because I've been, at times, busy and ill, and otherwise occupied. It's been a time lately, and it hasn't really let up until the last couple of days. And yes, indeed, also a week where we put Kidnapped on hold, and I think Lucy ended up doing like the majority of the reading that week. I obviously did some streams too, but I think it was primarily her or me and her, and I did like one or maybe two on my own, I'm not sure. But yes, hello, we're here now. Despite our best efforts, it's Saturday evening, and I have a story that I'm going to continue reading for you soon. But I can only say, like, without completely doxing myself to anyone who happens to know broadly where I live, there is apparently some kind of rave or dance party or something. Basically, I have some pretty, like, loud thumping dance beats echoing across this final day of August evening, and it's setting the right kind of vibe. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong with a little bit of, thumping dance music on a Saturday evening. People having loud fun, exactly, how dare. But for me, particularly in this moment, with the vibe that we're trying to set for the stream, there's a bit of a clash. Erin, you'll be catching the VOD probably. We need to go to bed. Frankly, same. I am impressively low energy this evening. I am extremely tired. I'm to the point where if I were in a shop that sells food and drink, for the point that I'm going to make here, I would actually possibly have found myself looking with some amount of temptation at energy drinks upon the shelves. Something I've literally never had. I've never even touched Red Bull. This isn't some proud claim like, ooh, look at me, I am superior. I've just never, they don't appeal to me. I'll drink coffee. That's fine. I'll have 2 in a day. That's me. I'm done there. I have no need, like, for one, caffeine's not energy. It's a different thing. But but this evening, I feel like maybe I could actually possibly look at some kind of, I'm not going to start naming brand names, we've already done one, but some sort of energy drink on a shelf and go, maybe I'll consider one of these daringly described flavours that you have put upon the can. I don't know, but I don't have that. So you just get tired me, and hopefully we'll make it, all of us together, make it to the end of the stream, because I'm very tired. Yeah, I have also one other things I don't have a problem with. Dance music. It's absolutely fine. Like, it would be extremely hypocritical of me to have a problem, considering that, as I've now mentioned a few times, having ended up watching a couple of different DJs on Twitch, I've, one, come to really appreciate the music a lot more than I ever used to, and two, kind of wanted to have a go at DJing myself. And, frankly, that's just someone else out there doing exactly what I would love to be doing. So no complaints here, just vibe clash. After 2 weeks keeping an abnormally healthy sleep schedule, you stayed up until 4 AM the last 2 nights for no apparent reason, so you sympathise? Yeah, oh man, last year, there was a point last year where I was going to bed like around or before 1 o'clock in the morning, which is unheard of for me, and I was actually getting up early enough in the morning that I could have breakfast without it just feeling like a lunch starter. And I was kind of proud of myself for that. And then it slipped, and it's not been, well, no, that's a lie. By functional human standards, it's not been great, but by my worst, it's not been too bad. And then in the last week, I got access to Deadlock, which those of you that follow the Longest John's channel will have seen me playing yesterday. I was playing yesterday, not on stream, on Thursday. Yesterday was Friday. Thank you, Rebecca Black. And I I've now, unfortunately, caught myself staying up a little bit too late. I'm just playing bot matches, not against real people, because the servers for multiplayer turn off at 2, but there's no one to turn off the bot servers, so you can just play bot matches all night long and get better at the game. And so I've been doing that, not getting better, just playing bot matches to learn the game, and it's very fun. It's really fun. And for the first time in, I think, I'm not out of place to say, literal years, we kind of got most of the gang back together that I used to play Dota with. Like last night, and everyone was just like, yeah, you want to try playing some Deadlock together? And yeah, we do. And genuinely, that was really, really nice. It is something I've been wanting for a long time, needing for longer. I hope we can do it again, frankly. But yeah, that was really, really nice, just to have like everyone in a group playing the same video game, hanging out and just kind of having fun. It was nice. And hey, guess what? Video games can be a good time. Oh, Erin, you've not been feeling well the entire week? Not sick, but not healthy either? Oh no, I hope, yeah. I think, I'm pretty sure I am over whatever I've had, but it still feels like there's just a bit of an illness tail to it, where I'm I've been waking up feeling bad, and thinking like, oh no, am I coming down with something again, or is it the same thing still just hanging around? And, no, it after a few hours into the day with like some food and some water and stuff, it goes away. But a few days this week I've just woken up feeling sick, and not in the good kind, not in the kind that's like kick flipping over a bench, bad kind. And so, yeah, there seems to be some stuff going around. You'd be amazed if it's not COVID, but it's not COVID kind of bad. Like I mean, you hear things, but without tests, it's difficult to actually say, oh yeah, I think it was this, because obviously there's a lot of some of you may have noticed in the last few years, there's a lot of speculation over illness, and so it's very easy to just go, oh well, I heard someone say that this thing is possible, and you go, oh well, checks out, that lines up with me, okay, it's that, and you diagnose without doing anything proper. But yeah, I don't know. There's stuff. Illness is a fun thing. Probably you're tired just from visiting your sister. How are you going to survive following the longest pony tour? How much of the tour are you following? Because that sounds exhausting. Good luck. I genuinely, sincerely, good luck. You had an increase in COVID PTS points at the hospital lately. Doing all of it? Dang. Hell yeah. That's rock and roll. Good luck. I don't even know I could do one. It's a nice one. Let her rip. Oh, patients. An increase in COVID patients in the hospital. Yeah, I have heard that it is on the rise, probably coinciding with the old... It's long enough ago now for it to be old, the Yankee Candle bad reviews on Amazon to start peaking upwards. Yeah... I don't know. Yeah, whatever COVID is doing now, I'm sure is going to be functioning a bit different from the past, which is me referring to how ill I've been feeling, which, like, I'm pretty sure I've now had COVID a couple of times, and I've had, or like, as in, yeah, COVID classic, you know, the original variant, which it hits you like a flu truck. And it just takes you out, and then just like sits in your throat and chest for like 2 months afterwards. And how I've been feeling the last week hasn't been that. It's been very different to that. I don't want to start going into symptoms, but it's been very different to that. But definitely had that kind of, oh, something is drastically wrong impacts. But also seems to have cleared off a lot faster as well. So yeah, I don't know. You and some other weirdos are renting a car together and going to go to all of them? Hell yeah, doing like a big old week-long road trip. That, I mean, genuinely, that sounds like a great time. I hope you really enjoy it. Had COVID for the first time in January and have been having random dizzy spells since. Nasty stuff. Yeah, that sucks. I feel like well, I don't know actually. I was going to say, I feel like I've gotten away lightly in that I don't necessarily feel like I've had too many long-lasting repercussions from it. But it may just be that in my usual perpetually exhausted, slightly dazed state, any of the long-running side effects just they don't. I'm just still functioning as I always have done. Maybe I am addled in some form by it, I don't know. And you've still never had it, knock on wood. Like somehow either Lucy hasn't had it, or she just doesn't present any symptoms when she gets it, because she has definitely been around me at times when, well, I didn't know that I had it until like a day or two later. So I would have definitely been contagious, and she's just like somehow dodged it every time. So yeah, I don't know. Lynn, you're taking a train around the 4 longest pony tour, health permitting. Hell yeah. Good luck. Having seen some of the stories you have told about attempting to use public transport as a wheelchair user, yeah, genuinely good luck. I hope that goes okay for you and you don't get any of the nonsense. Yeah. I mean, oh yeah, you spent a lot of hours in the car with somebody then tested positive. Yeah, that's the thing. For me, I've done. Okay, I guess we're on to COVID talk. I've been around people who have tested positive and have also myself followed the exact trajectory of the symptoms they have had, which is that's my self-diagnosis basically, without having actually, when I have taken a test, shown up anything. But other people who I have been in close proximity to have taken a test that has come up positive, and my symptoms have followed exactly theirs and everything they have had. It's like, yeah, I guess I've had it. You know, it's like that's second to a red line on a test. Yeah, I don't know. But in good news, I have seen there's some kind of nasal, intranasal spray or something as a vaccine that thought I saw was testing 100% effective, which I think this was still on animal testing stages, lab mice or whatever, and not people. Sounds suspicious. Yeah, 100% is kind of a big number to put on something like that. I would need to go back and check the source, but I think it seemed like a fairly credible article that was talking about it. How's my volume, by the way? I'm just going to put myself up a little bit. Yeah, nothing 100% effective. Yeah, that's why I'm sort of... Oh no, that's way too much. That's why I'm sort of hesitant over... oh yeah, have you seen that they've got a thing that's perfect and solving it? But let's test that a bit more and make sure we got those numbers exactly right, shall we? Yeah. But it's, an effective vaccine sounds promising. Hey. Anyway, sorry to anyone who was looking for light and cheery book talk. We'll get to the book in a second. That's true. I was looking for the text to put into chat, which is here, and chapter 12. Let's find that for you. Chat, I am so tired this evening. Anyway, right. Should we have a story? No, that's not how that works. That goes... Not trying to get rid of you, Arian. You should head up to bed then? Fair enough. Yeah, thank you for being here. Go sleep well. Lovely to see you. Also, if Dave raids over, tell him I said hi. Kidnapping isn't exactly a cheery subject. No, it's not. But, this one's got some adventure. Oh, we did forget to thank you, Lady Mephistopheles. Yeah, hello to Sherlock Holmes, and also hello to Jason Isaacs. I did see the pictures you were posting earlier, Llama, of Sherlock on your laptop. Dave's busy with capybaras. There's a noble thing to be busy with. That is fair. What have we got coming up? We have more dodgy Scottish accents. I can promise you that. Which will sound fine in my head and at the point of me speaking them. And then if I catch any wind of it on the VOD, I'm like, oh, good grief, no, what are you doing? So I apologise to Scotland. I'm going to apologise every time. Even though you're all very kind and polite and say, no, Sam, it sounds fine. I apologise to Scotland. I know how precious you are of your accent, and it's completely fair and earned. Sherlock sleeping on your feet. Nice. Joey is asleep in a box on the bed. He will probably ask to go out in about 3 minutes once I get into this. But yeah, where were we? Where had we left things? So, our protagonist, David, we're all just really jealous of Scottish accents. We are. Like, it's... They are good accents. They're good accents, Bront. And like... Again, I feel like this is where I am self-conscious of it, because it is, like... Oh, we're getting on to more subjects, I'm sorry. It's something that, like, as a kid, certainly growing up the way I did and surrounded by the people that I was, it was always kind of something that was used in mockery. Like a Scottish accent was never something that was... It was never something that was done or treated with a lot of respect. Which I'm ashamed to say, because, you know, I don't like that that's been a part of how I've come up. But, you know, it is what it is, and I'm sorry about that. Which, now that I'm older... I'm like, well, that sucks. But that's where, like, I have struggles when doing Scottish and other, like, regional accents, because, you know, I don't want to mock and make fun of these things, and that's kind of how I was taught to do them, how I learned to do them. That, you know, if you're making fun of someone, you take the piss out of their accent, and that's not nice. And so I have, like, this kind of reflex whenever I'm doing any kind of regional accent that goes, no, you're making fun, Sam, don't do that. And so I'm always trying to, like, go round that and kind of, firstly, yeah, still deprogram those thought processes and do a better job of imitating it. You had a nice one cuddle with your little void? Yay, nice. Joey had a hairball earlier, which was really distracting because I was trying to read. Oh, hey, Andy Vance. Guess what got flagged up by Automod for what you were saying in there? The American version of that is a southern accent. Everybody uses it as shorthand for stupid hick, but since moving to Kentucky, you love it. You kind of don't have much of a specific regional accent naturally. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, especially like if you have my accent, which is extremely, to my ears, extremely just neutral. It's nothing, and so therefore, it's, you know, like, oh no, I'm speaking correct and proper. Anyone, especially, you know, the Birmingham accent is the one that always gets the mockery. And again, unfairly. It's like, it's not, no accent should be mocked, right? It's just people speaking how people speak. Don't mock accents, it's mean. You have a bit of the same feeling about doing an accent at the southern bit of Sweden, since it's often mocked and considered ugly. Yeah, like, it's just not cool. Don't do it. And so it's hard to kind of separate. If you've only learned it in that environment of mockery, it's hard to separate it from, like, an earnest attempt at imitating an accent, which, you know, by itself shouldn't be offensive. It should only be offensive if you're actually, like, making fun of it. Which is the problem, that it was so often done to make fun of, yeah, and that's not cool. But yeah, so we're going to have some, after all that, we're going to have some dodgy Scottish accents, and I apologise, but I'm trying my best. And frankly, it's something I would like to actually get better at. It's the north here in France, I'm assuming you mean. That's mocked, same as in the UK. That's where poor, formerly industrialised areas are. Have a bit of the accent since you're from there. Okay. See, that's another thing as well, because, like, I'm... Being an English speaker, I am obviously very familiar with, you know, accents in which English is spoken from all across the UK and from across America as well. But accents in other languages is a fascinating one to me because the only language I have any kind of passing familiarity with is French. And I've never encountered enough French to hear different regional accents within it. And then going beyond that, I'm completely ignorant. So yeah, accents in other languages, of course they'll exist. Why would they not? Of course accents will exist in every language. But yeah, it's something that's so far removed from what I'm used to that it's really interesting to me. But anyway, we're now 20 minutes into the stream. I've not read a word. And I'm expecting this to kind of go a full length of reading. So, shall we start? Shall we begin? Your link is pinned at the top of chat. And if we are ready and comfy and settled, I mean, feel free to carry on the accent talk in chat. I will try not to read it because it will distract me, and I'm very distractible this evening. But yes, if we're ready, let us have some more Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 12. I Hear of the Red Fox. Before we had done cleaning out the roundhouse, a breeze sprang up from a little to the east of north. This blew off the rain and brought out the sun. And here I must explain, and the reader would do well to look at a map. On the day when the fog fell and we ran down Alan's boat, we had been running through the Little Minch. At dawn after the battle, we lay becalmed to the east of the Isle of Canna, or between that and Isle Eriska, in the chain of the Long Island. Now, to get from there to the Linney Loch, the straight course was through the narrows of the Sound of Mull. But the captain had no chart. He was afraid to trust his brig so deep among the islands, and the wind serving well, he preferred to go by west of Tiree and come up under the southern coast of the great Isle of Mull. All day the breeze held in the same point, and rather freshened than died down, and towards afternoon a swell began to set in from round the Outer Hebrides. Our course, to go round about the inner isles, was to the west of south, so that at first we had this swell upon our beam, and were much rolled about. But after nightfall, when we had turned the east of Tiree and began to head more to the east, the sea came right astern. So turned the end of Tiree and began to head more to the east, the sea came right astern. Meanwhile, the early part of the day, before the swell came up, was very pleasant. Sailing, as we were, in a bright sunshine, and with many mountainous islands upon different sides, Alan and I sat in the roundhouse with the doors open on each side, the wind being straight astern, and smoked a pipe or two of the captain's fine tobacco. It was at this time we heard each other's stories, which was the more important to me, as I gained some knowledge of that wild Highland country on which I was soon to land. In those days, so close on the back of the Great Rebellion, it was needful a man should know what he was doing when he went upon the heather. It was I that showed the example, telling him all my misfortune. When he heard with great good nature, only when I came to mention that good friend of mine, Mr. Campbell, the minister, Alan fired up and cried out that he hated all that were of that name. "Why," said I, "he is a man you should be proud to give your hand to." I know nothing I would help a Campbell to," says he, "unless it was a leaden bullet. I would hunt all of that name like Blackhawks. If I lay dying, I would crawl upon my knees to the chamber window for a shot at one." "Why, Alan," I cried, "what ails ye at the Campbells?" "Well," says he, "ye ken very well that I am an Appin Stewart, and the Campbells have long harried and wasted those of my name. Aye, and got loads of us by treachery, but never with the sword. he cried loudly, and with the word brought down his fist upon the table. But I paid the less attention to this, for I knew it was usually said by those who have the underhand. There's more than that, he continued, and all in the same story. Lying words, lying papers, tricks fit for a peddler, and the show of what's legal overall to make a man the more angry. You that are so wasteful of your buttons, said I can hardly think you would be a good judge of business. Ah, says he, falling again to smiling, I got my wastefulness from the same man I got the buttons from, and that was my poor father Duncan Stewart, grace be to him. He was the prettiest man of his kindred, and the best swordsman in the Highlands, David, and that is the same as to say in all the world, I should ken, for it was him that taught me. He was in the Black Watch when first it was mustered, and like other gentlemen privates, had a gillie at his back to carry his firelock for him in the march. Well, the king, it appears, was wishful to see Highland swordsmanship, and my father and 3 more were chosen out, and sent to London town to let him see it at the best. So they were had into the place and showed the whole art of the sword for 2 hours at a stretch, before King George and Queen Caroline, and the butcher Cumberland, and many more of whom I have nae mind. And when they were through, the king, for all he was a rank usurper, spoke them fair and gave each man 3 guineas in his hand. Now, as they were going out of the palace, they had a porter's lodge to go by, and it came in on my father, as he was perhaps the first private Highland gentleman that had ever gone by that door, it was right he should give the poor porter a proper notion of their quality. So he gives the king's 3 guineas into the man's hand, as if it was his common custom. The 3 others that came behind him did the same, and there they were on the street, never a penny the better for their pains. Some say it was one, that was the first to fee the king's porter, some say it was another, but the truth of it is that it was Duncan Stewart, as I am willing to prove with either sword or pistol, and that was the father that I had, God rest him. I think he was not the man to leave you rich, said I. And that's true, said Alan. He left me my breeks to cover me and little besides, and that was how I came to enlist, which was a black spot upon my character at the best of times, and would still be a sore job for me if I fell among the redcoats. What? Cried I. Were you in the English army? That was I, said Alan, but I deserted to the right side at Preston Pans, and that's some comfort. I could scarcely share this view, holding desertion under arms for an unpardonable fault in honour. But for all I was so young, I was wiser than say my thought. Dear, dear, says I, the punishment is death. Aye, said he, if they got hands on me, it would be a short shrift and a lang tour for Alan. But I have the King of France's commission in my pocket, which would aye be some protection. I misdoubt it much, said I. I have doubts myself, said Alan dryly. And, good heaven, man, cried I, you that are a condemned rebel and a deserter, and a man of the French king's, what tempts you back into this country? It's a braving of Providence. Tut, says Alan. I've been back every year since 46. And what brings you, man? Cried I. Well, you see, I weary for my friends in country, said he. France is a braw place, nae doubt, but I weary for the heather and the deer. And then I have bit things that I attend to, whiles I pick up a few lads to serve the King of France. Recruits, you see, and that's aye a little money. But the heart of the matter is the business of my chief, Ardshiel. I thought they called you Chief Appin, said I. Aye, but Ardshiel is the captain of the clan, said he, which scarcely cleared my mind. You see, David, he that was all his life so great a man, and come of the blood and bearing the name of kings, is now brought down to live in a French town like a poor and private person. He that had 400 swords at his whistle, I have seen, with these eyes of mine, buying butter in the marketplace, and taking it home in a keel leaf. This is not only a pain, but a disgrace to us of his family and clan. There are the bairns forby, the children and the hope of Appin, that must be learned their letters and how to hold a sword in that far country. Now, the tenants of Appin have to pay rent to King George, but their hearts are staunch, and they are true to their chief. And what with love and a bit of pressure, and maybe a threat or two, the poor folks scrape up a second rent for Ardshiel. Well, David, I'm the hand that carries it. And he struck the belt about his body so that the guineas rang. Do they pay both? Cried I. Aye, David, both, says he. What? 2 rents? I repeated. Aye, David, said he. I told a different tale to yon captain man, but this is the truth of it, and it's wonderful to me how little pressure is needed. But that's the handiwork of my good kinsman and my father's friend, James of the Glens. James Stewart, that is, Ardshiel's half-brother. He it is that gets the money in and does the management. This was the first time I heard the name of that James Stewart, who was afterwards so famous at the time of his hanging. But I took little heed of the moment, for all my mind was occupied with the generosity of these poor Highlanders. I call it noble, I cried. I'm a Whig or little better, but I call it noble. Aye, said he, you're a Whig, but you're a gentleman, and that's what does it. Now, if you were one of the cursed race of Campbell, you'd gnash your teeth to hear tell of it. If you were the Red Fox. And at that name his teeth shut together, and he ceased speaking. I have seen many a grim face, but never a grimmer than Alan's when he had named the Red Fox. And who is the Red Fox? I asked, daunted but still curious. Who is he? Cried Alan. Well, and I'll tell you that. When the men of the clans were broken at Culloden, and the good cause went down, and the horses rode over the fetlocks in the best blood of the north, Ardshiel had to flee like a poor deer upon the mountains, he and his lady and his bairns. A sair job we had of it before we got him shipped, and while he still lay in the heather, the English rogues that couldna come at his life were striking at his rights. They stripped him of his powers, they stripped him of his lands, they plucked the weapons from the hands of his clansmen that had borne arms for 30 centuries. Aye, and the very clothes off the backs, so that it's now a sin to wear a tartan plaid, and a man may be cast into jail if he has but a kilt about his legs. One thing they couldna kill. That was the love the clansmen bore their chief. These guineas are the proof of it. And now, in there steps a man, a Campbell, red-headed Colin of Glenure. Is that him you call the Red Fox? Said I. Will you bring me his brush? Cries Alan fiercely. Aye, that's the man. In he steps, and gets papers from King George to be so-called king's factor on the lands of Appin. And at first he sings small, and his hail fellow well met with Seamus, that's James of the Glens, my chieftain's agent. But by and by that came to his ears that I've just told you, how the poor commons of Appin, the farmers and the crofters and the bowmen, were wringing their very plaids to get a second rent and send it overseas for Ardshiel and his poor bairns. What was it you called it when I told you? I called it noble, Alan, said I. And you little better than a common Whig, cries Alan. But when it came to Colin Roy, the black Campbell blood in him ran wild. He sat, gnashing his teeth at the wine table. What should a steward get a bite of bread and him not be able to prevent it? Ah, Red Fox, if ever I hold you at gun's end, the Lord have pity upon ye. Alan stopped to swallow down his anger. Well, David, what does he do? He declares all the farms to let, and thinks he, in his black heart, I'll soon get other tenants that'll overbid these Stewarts and McCalls and McRobs, for these are the names of my clan, David. And then, thinks he, Ardshiel will have to hold his bonnet on a French roadside. Well, said I, what followed? Alan laid down his pipe, which he had long since suffered to go out, and set his 2 hands upon his knees. Aye, said he, you'll never guess that. For these same Stewarts and McCalls and McRobs that had 2 rents to pay, one to King George by stark force and one to Ardshiel by natural kindness, offered him a better price than any Campbell in all broad Scotland. And far he sent seeking them, as far as to the sides of Clyde and the cross of Edinburgh, seeking and fleeching and begging them to come, where there was a Stuart to be starved and a red-headed hound for a Campbell to be pleasured. Well, Alan, said I, that is a strange story and a fine one too, and, wig as I may be, I'm glad the man was beaten. Him beaten? Echoed Alan. It's little you ken of Campbells and less of the Red Fox. Him beaten? No, nor will be till his blood's on the hillside. But if the day comes, David man, that I can find time and leisure for a bit of hunting, there grows not enough heather in all Scotland to hide him from my vengeance. Man, Alan, said I, you're neither very wise nor very Christian to blow off so many words of anger. They will do the man you call a fox no harm and yourself no good. Tell me your tale plainly out. What did he next? And that's a good observed, David, said Alan. Troth, and indeed, they will do him no harm, the more's the pity. And barring that about Christianity, of which my opinion is quite otherwise, though I be nae Christian, I am much of your mind. Opinion here or opinion there, said I. It's a kent thing that Christianity forbids revenge. Aye, said he, it's well seen it was a Campbell taught ye. It would be a convenient world for them and their sort if there was no such thing as a lad and a gun behind a heather bush. But that's nothing to the point. This is what he did. Aye, said I, come to that. Well, David, said he, since he couldn't be rid of the loyal commons by fair means, he swore he would be rid of them by foul. Ardshiel was to starve. That was the thing he aimed at. And since them that fed him in his exile wouldn't be brought out, right or wrong, he would drive them out. Therefore he sent for lawyers and papers and redcoats to stand at his back, and the kindly folk of that country must all pack and tramp every father's son out of his father's house, and out of the place where he was bred and fed, and played when he was a callant. And who are to succeed them? Bare-legged beggars. King George is to whistle for his rents. He maun do with less. He can spread his butter thinner. What cares Red Colin? If he can hurt Ardshiel, he has his wish. If he can pluck the meat from my chieftain's table and the bit toys out of his children's hands, he will gang hame singing to Glenure. Let me have a word, said I. Be sure, if they take less rents, be sure government has a finger in the pie. It's not this Campbell's fault, man. It's his orders. And if you killed this Colin tomorrow, what better would you be? There would be another factor in his shoes as fast as spur can drive. You're a good lad in a fight, said Alan. But man, you have Whig blood in you. He spoke kindly enough, but there was so much anger under his contempt that I thought it was wise to change the conversation. I expressed my wonder how, with the Highlands covered with troops and guarded like a city in a siege, a man in his situation could come and go without arrest. That's easier than you'd think, said Alan. A bare hillside, you see, is like all one road. If there's a sentry at one place, you just go by another. And then hither's a great help. And everywhere there are friends' houses and friends' byres and haystacks. And besides, when folk talk about a country covered with troops, it's but a kind of a byword at best. A soldier covers nae mair of it than his boot soles. I've fished a water with a sentry on the other side of the brae, and killed a fine trout, and I've sat in a heather bush within 6 feet of another and learned a real bonny tune from his whistling. This was it, said he, and whistled me the air. And then, besides, he continued, it's no so bad now as it was in 46. The Highlands are what they call pacified. Small wonder, with never a gun or a sword left from Cantyre to keep wrath, but what a tenty folk have hidden in their thatch. But what I would like to ken, David, is just how long. Not long, you would think, with men like Ardshiel in exile and men like the Red Fox sitting boiling the wine and oppressing the poor at home. But it's a kittle thing to decide what folk will bear and what they will not. Or why would Red Colin be riding his horse all over my poor country of Appin, and never a pretty lad put a bullet in him? And with this, Alan fell into a muse, and for a long time sate very sad and silent. I will add the rest of what I have to say about my friend, that he was skilled in all kinds of music, but principally pipe music, was a well-considered poet in his own tongue, had read several books both in French and English, was a dead shot, a good angler, and an excellent fencer with the small sword as well as with his own particular weapon. For his faults, they were on his face, and I now knew them all. But the worst of them, his childish propensity to take offence and to pick quarrels, he greatly laid aside in my case, out of regard for the battle of the Round House. But whether it was because I had done well myself, or because I had been a witness of his own much greater prowess, is more than I can tell. Although he had a great taste for courage in other men, yet he admired it most in Alan Breck. Chapter 13. The Loss of the Brig. It was already late at night, and as dark as it ever would be at that season of the year, and that is to say, it was still pretty bright, when Hoseason clapped his head into the roundhouse door. "Here," said he, "come out and see if you can pilot." "Is this one of your tricks?" asked Alan. "Do I look like tricks?" cries the captain. "I have other things to think of. My brig's in danger." By the concerned look of his face, and, above all, by the sharp tones in which he spoke of his brig, it was plain to both of us he was in deadly earnest, and so Alan and I, with no great fear of treachery, stepped on deck. The sky was clear. It blew hard and was bitter cold. A great deal of daylight lingered, and the moon, which was nearly full, shone brightly. The brig was close-hauled, so as to round the southwest corner of the island of Mull, the hills of which, and Ben Moor above them all, with a wisp of mist upon the top of it, lay full upon the larboard bow. Though it was no good point of sailing for the Covenant, she tore through the seas at a great rate, pitching and straining, and pursued by the westerly swell. Altogether, it was no such ill night to keep the seas in, and I had begun to wonder what it was that sat so heavily upon the captain, when the brig, rising suddenly on the top of a high swell, he pointed and cried to us to look. Away on the lee bow, a thing like a fountain rose out of the moonlit sea, and immediately after we heard a low sound of roaring. "What do you call that?" asked the captain gloomily. "The sea breaking on a reef," said Alan, "and now you ken where it is, and what better would you have?" "Aye," said Hoseason, "if it was the only one." And sure enough, just as he spoke, there came a second fountain further to the south. "There," said Hoseason, "see for yourself. If I had kent of these reefs, if I had had a chance, or if Shuan had been spared, it's not 60 guineas, no, nor 600 would have made me risk my brig and sick a stone yard. But you, sir, that was to pilot us. Have you never a word?" "I'm thinking," said Alan. "It'll be what they call the Tollen Rocks." "Are there many of them?" says the captain. "Truly, sir, I am nae pilot," said Alan, "but it sticks in my mind that there are 10 miles of them." Mr. Rich and the captain looked at each other. "There's a way through 'em, I suppose?" said the captain. "Doubtless," said Alan, "but where?" "But it somehow runs in my mind once more that it is clearer under the land." "So?" said Hoseason. "We'll have to haul our wind then, Mr. Riach. We'll have to come as near in about the end of Mull as we can take her, sir. Even then we'll have the land to keep the wind off us, and the stone yard on our lee. Well, we're in for it now, we may as well crack on." With that he gave an order to the steersman, and sent Riach to the foretop. There were only 5 men on deck, counting the officers. These were all that were fit, or at least both fit and willing, for their work. And 2 of these were hurt. So, as I say, it fell to Mr. Riach to go aloft, and there he sat there looking out and hailing the deck with news of all he saw. "The sea to the south is thick," he cried, and then, after a while, "It does seem clearer in by the land." "Well, sir," said Hoseason to Alan, "we'll try your way of it, but I think I might as well trust to a blind fiddler. Pray God you're right." "Pray God I am," says Alan to me, "but where did I hear it?" Well, it will be as it must." As we got nearer to the turn of the land, the reefs began to be sown here and there on our very path, and Mr. Riach sometimes cried down to us to change the course. Sometimes, indeed, none too soon, for one reef was so close upon the brig's weatherboard that when a sea burst upon it, the lighter sprays fell upon her deck and wetted us like rain. The brightness of the night showed us these perils as clearly as by day, which was perhaps the more alarming. It showed me, too, the face of the captain as he stood by the steersman, now on one foot, now on the other, and sometimes blowing in his hands, but still listening and looking as steady as steel. Neither he nor Mr. Riach had shown well in the fighting, but I saw they were brave in their own trade, and admired them all the more because I found Alan very white. "Och on, David," says he, "this is no the kind of death I fancy." "What, Alan?" I cried. "You're not afraid?" "No," said he, wetting his lips, "but you'll allow yourself. It's a cold ending." By this time, now and then sheering to one side or the other to avoid a reef, but still hugging the wind and the land, we had got round Iona and begun to come alongside Mull. The tide at the tail of the land ran very strong and threw the brig about. 2 hands were put to the helm, and Hoseason himself would sometimes lend a help, and it was strange to see 3 strong men throw their weight upon the tiller, and it, like a living thing, struggle against and drive them back. This would have been the greater danger, had not the sea been for some while free of obstacles. Mr. Riach, besides, announced from the top that he saw clear water ahead. "You were right," said Hoseason to Alan. "You have saved the brig, sir. I'll mind that when we come to clear accounts." And I believe he not only meant what he said, but would have done it. So high a place did the covenant hold in his affections. But this is matter only for conjecture, things having gone otherwise than he forecast. "Keep her away at point," sings out Mr. Riach. "Reef to windward." And just at the same time the tide caught the brig and threw the wind out of her sails. She came round into the wind like a top, and the next moment struck the reef with such a dunch as threw us all flat upon the deck, and came near to shake Mr. Riach from his place upon the mast. I was on my feet in a minute. The reef on which we had struck was close in under the south-west of Mull, off a little island they call Erid, which lay low and black upon the larboard. Sometimes the swell broke clean over us. Sometimes it only ground the poor brig upon the reef, so that we could hear her beat herself to pieces, and what with the great noise of the sails, and the singing of the wind, and the flying of the spray in the moonlight, and the sense of danger, I think my head must have been partly turned, for I could scarcely understand the things I saw. Presently I observed Mr. Riach and the seamen busy around the skiff, and still in the same blank ran over to assist them. And as soon as I set my hand to work, my mind came clear again. It was no very easy task, for the skiff lay amidships and was full of hamper, and the breaking of the heavier seas continually forced us to give over and hold on, but we all wrought like horses while we could. Meanwhile, such of the wounded as could move came clambering out of the forescuttle and began to help, while the rest that lay helpless in their bunks harrowed me with screaming and begging to be saved. The captain took no part. It seemed he was struck stupid. He stood holding by the shrouds, talking to himself and groaning out aloud whenever the ship hammered on the rock. His brig was like wife and child to him. He had looked on day by day at the mishandling of poor Ransom, but when it came to the brig, he seemed to suffer along with her. All the time of our working at the boat, I remember only one other thing, that I asked Alan, looking across at the shore, what country it was, and he answered it was the worst possible for him, for it was a land of the Campbells. We had one of the wounded men told off to keep a watch upon the seas and cry us warning. Well, we had the boat about ready to be launched, when this man sang out pretty shrill, "For God's sake, hold on!" We knew by his tone that it was something more than ordinary, and sure enough there followed a sea so huge that it lifted the brig right up and canted her over on her beam. Whether the cry came too late, or my hold was too weak, I know not. But at the sudden tilting of the ship, I was cast clean over the bulwarks into the sea. I went down and drank my fill, and then came up and got a blink at the moon, and then down again. They say a man sinks the third time for good. I cannot be made like other folk then, for I would not like to write how often I went down or how often I came up again. All the while I was being hurled along and beaten upon and choked and then swallowed whole, and the thing was so distracting to my wits that I was neither sorry nor afraid. Presently I found I was holding to a spar which helped me somewhat, and then all of a sudden I was in quiet water and began to come to myself. It was the spare yard I had got hold of, and I was amazed to see how far I had travelled from the brig. I hailed her, indeed, but it was plain she was already out of cry. She was still holding together, but whether or not they had yet launched the boat, I was too far off and too low down to see. While I was hailing the brig, I spied a tract of water lying between us, where no great waves came, but which yet boiled white all over, and bristled in the moon with rings and bubbles. Sometimes the whole tract swung to one side, like the tail of a live serpent. Sometimes, for a glimpse, it would disappear and then boil up again. What it was, I had no guess, which for the time increased my fear of it. But I now know it must have been the roost or tide race, which had carried me away so fast and tumbled me about so cruelly, and at last, as if tired of what play, I had flung me and the spare yard upon its landward margin. I now lay quite becalmed, and began to feel that a man can die of cold as well as of drowning. The shores of Erid were close in. I could see in the moonlight the dots of heather and the sparkling of the mica on the rocks. Well, I thought to myself, if I cannot get as far as that, it's strange. I had no skill of swimming, Essen water being small in our neighbourhood, but when I laid hold upon the yard with both arms and kicked out with both feet, I soon began to find that I was moving. Hard work it was, and mortally slow, but in about an hour of kicking and splashing, I had got well in between the points of a sandy bay surrounded by low hills. The sea was here quite quiet. There was no sound of any surf. The moon shone clear, and I thought in my heart I had never seen a place so desert and desolate. But it was dry land, and when at last it grew so shallow that I could leave the yard and wade ashore upon my feet, I cannot tell if I was more tired or more grateful. Both, at least, I was. Tired as I never was before that night, and grateful to God as I trust I have been often, though never with more cause. Chapter 14. The Islet. With my stepping ashore, I began the most unhappy part of my adventures. It was 12:30 in the morning, and though the wind was broken by the land, it was a cold night. I dared not sit down, for I thought I should have frozen, but took off my shoes and walked to and fro upon the sand, barefoot and beating my breast with infinite weariness. There was no sound of man or cattle, not a cock crew, though it was about the hour of their first waking. Only the surf broke outside in the distance, which put me in mind of my perils and those of my friend. To walk by the sea at that hour of the morning, and in a place so desert-like and lonesome, struck me with a kind of fear. As soon as the day began to break, I put on my shoes and climbed a hill, the ruggedest scramble I ever undertook, falling the whole way between big blocks of granite or leaping from one to another. When I got to the top, the dawn was come. There was no sign of the brig, which must have lifted from the reef and sunk. The boat, too, was nowhere to be seen. There was never a sail upon the ocean, and in what I could see of the land was neither house nor man. I was afraid to think what had befallen my shipmates, and afraid to look longer at so empty a scene. What with my wet clothes and weariness, and my belly that now began to ache with hunger, I had enough to trouble me without that. So I set off eastward along the south coast, hoping to find a house where I might warm myself, and perhaps get news of those I had lost. And at the worst, I considered the sun would soon rise and dry my clothes. After a little, my way was stopped by a creek or inlet of the sea, which seemed to run pretty deep into the land, and as I had no means to get across, I must needs change my direction to go about the end of it. It was still the roughest kind of walking. Indeed, the whole, not only of Erid, but of the neighbouring part of Mull, which they call the Ross, is nothing but a jumble of granite rocks with heather in among. At first the creek kept narrowing, as I had looked to see, but presently, to my surprise, it had begun to widen out again. At this I scratched my head, but had still no notion of the truth, until at last I came to a rising ground, and it burst upon me all in a moment that I was cast upon a little barren isle, and cut off on every side by the salt seas. Instead of the sun rising to dry me, it came on to rain with a thick mist, so that my case was lamentable. I stood in the rain and shivered, and wondered what to do, till it occurred to me that perhaps the creek was fordable. Back I went to the narrowest point and waded in, but not 3 yards from shore I plumped in head over ears, and if ever I was heard of more, it was rather by God's grace than by my own prudence. I was no wetter, for that could hardly be, but I was all the colder for this mishap, and having lost another hope, was the more unhappy. And now, all at once, the yard came in my head. What had carried me through the roost would surely serve me to cross this little quiet creek in safety. With that I set off, undaunted, across the top of the isle to fetch and carry it back. It was a weary tramp in all ways, and if hope had not buoyed me up, I must have cast myself down and given up. Whether with the sea salt, or because I was growing fevered, I was distressed with thirst and had to stop as I went, and drink the peaty water out of the hags. I came to the bay at last, more dead than alive, and at the first glance I thought the yard was something further out than when I left it. In I went for the 3rd time into the sea. The sand was smooth and firm, and shelved gradually down, so that I could wade out till the water was almost to my neck, and the little waves splashed into my face. But at that depth my feet began to leave me, and I durst venture in no further. As for the yard, I saw it bobbing very quietly some 20 feet in front of me. I had borne up well until this last disappointment, but at that I came ashore and flung myself down upon the sands and wept. The time I spent upon the island is still so horrible a thought to me that I must pass it over lightly. In all the books I have read of people cast away, they had either their pockets full of tools, or a chest of things would be thrown upon the beach along with them, as if on purpose. My case was very different. I had nothing in my pockets but money and Allen's silver button, and being inland bred, I was as much short of knowledge as of means. I knew indeed that shellfish were counted good to eat, and among the rocks of the isle I found a great plenty of limpets, which at first I could scarcely strike from their places, not knowing quickness to be needful. There were, besides, some of the little shells that we call buckies. I think periwinkle is the English name. Of these 2 I made my whole diet, devouring them cold and raw as I found them, and so hungry was I that at first they seemed to me delicious. Perhaps they were out of season, or perhaps there was something wrong in the sea about my island, but at least I had no sooner eaten my first meal than I was seized with giddiness and retching, and lay for a long time no better than dead. A second trial of the same food, indeed I had no other, did better with me and revived my strength. But as long as I was on the island, I never knew what to expect when I had eaten. Sometimes all was well, and sometimes I was thrown into a miserable sickness, nor could I ever distinguish what particular fish it was that hurt me. All day it streamed rain. The island ran like a sop. There was no dry spot to be found, and while I lay down that night, between two boulders that made a kind of roof, my feet were in a bog. The second day I crossed the island to all sides. There was no one part of it better than another. It was all desolate and rocky, nothing living on it but game birds which I lacked the means to kill, and the gulls which haunted the outlying rocks in a prodigious number. But the creek, or straits, that cut off the isle from the mainland of the Ross opened out on the north into a bay, and the bay again opened into the Sound of Iona. And it was the neighbourhood of this place that I chose to be my home, though if I had thought upon the very name of home in such a spot, I must have burst out weeping. I had good reasons for my choice. There was in this part of the isle a little hut of a house, like a pig's hut, where fishers used to sleep when they came there upon their business. But the turf roof of it had fallen entirely in, so that the hut was of no use to me, and gave me less shelter than my rocks. What was more important, the shellfish on which I lived grew there in great plenty. When the tide was out, I could gather a peck at a time, and this was doubtless a convenience, but the other reason went deeper. I had become in no way used to the horrid solitude of the isle, but still looked round me on all sides, like a man that was hunted, between fear and hope that I might see some human creature coming. Now, from a little up the hillside over the bay, I could catch a sight of the great ancient church and the roofs of the people's houses in Iona, and on the other hand, over the low country of the Ross, I saw smoke go up morning and evening, as if from a homestead in a hollow of the land. I used to watch this smoke when I was wet and cold, and had my head half turned with loneliness, and think of the fireside and the company till my heart burned. It was the same with the roofs of Iona. Altogether, this sight I had of men's homes and comfortable lives, although it put a point on my own sufferings, yet it kept hope alive, and helped me to eat my raw shellfish, which had soon grown to be a disgust, and saved me from the sense of horror I had whenever I was quite alone with dead rocks and fowls and the rain and the cold sea. I say it kept hope alive, and indeed it seemed impossible that I should be left to die on the shores of my own country, and within view of a church tower and the smoke of men's houses. But the second day passed, and though as long as the light lasted I kept a bright lookout for boats on the Sound or men passing on the Ross, no help came near me. It still rained, and I turned in to sleep, as wet as ever, and with a cruel sore throat, but a little comforted, perhaps, by having said good night to my next neighbours, the people of Iona. Charles II declared a man could stay outdoors more days in the year in the climate of England than in any other. This was very like a king with a palace at his back and changes of dry clothes, but he must have had better luck on his flight from Worcester than I had on that miserable isle. It was the height of summer, yet it rained for more than 24 hours, and did not clear until the afternoon of the third day. This was the day of incidents. In the morning I saw a red deer a buck with a fine spread of antlers standing in the rain on the top of the island, but he had scarce seen me rise from under my rock before he trotted off upon the other side. I supposed he must have swum the straits, though what should bring any creature to Erid was more than I could fancy. A little after, as I was jumping about after my limpets, I was startled by a guinea piece which fell upon a rock in front of me and glanced off into the sea. When the sailors gave me my money again, they kept back not only about a third of the whole sum, but my father's leather purse. So from that day out I carried my gold loose in a pocket with a button. I now saw there must be a hole, and clapped my hands to the place in a great hurry. But this was to lock the stable door after the steed was stolen. I had left the shore at Queensferry with near on £50. Now I found no more than 2 guinea pieces and a silver shilling. It is true I picked up a 3rd guinea a little after, where it lay shining on a piece of turf. That made a fortune of £3 and 4 shillings, English money, for a lad, the rightful heir of an estate, and now starving on an isle in the extreme end of the wild Highlands. This state of my affairs dashed me still further, and indeed my plight on that 3rd morning was truly pitiful. My clothes were beginning to rot. My stockings, in particular, were quite worn through, so that my shanks went naked. My hands had grown quite soft with the continual soaking. My throat was very sore, my strength had much abated, and my heart so turned against the horrid stuff I was condemned to eat that the very sight of it came near to sicken me. And yet the worst was not yet come. There was a pretty high rock on the northwest of Erid, which, because it had a flat top and overlooked the Sound, I was much in the habit of frequenting. Not that ever I stayed in one place, save when asleep, my misery giving me no rest. Indeed, I wore myself down with continual and aimless goings and comings in the rain. As soon, however, as the sun came out, I lay down on the top of that rock to dry myself. The comfort of the sunshine is a thing I cannot tell. It set me thinking hopefully of my deliverance, of which I had begun to despair, and I scanned the sea and the Ross with a fresh interest. On the south of my rock, a part of the island jutted out and hid the open ocean, so that a boat could thus come quite near me upon that side, and I be none the wiser. Well, all of a sudden, a cobble with a brown sail and a pair of fishers aboard it came flying round the corner of the isle, bound for Iona. I shouted out, and then fell on my knees on the rock and reached up my hands and prayed to them. They were near enough to hear. I could even see the colour of their hair, and there was no doubt but they observed me, for they cried out in the Gaelic tongue and laughed. But the boat never turned aside, and flew on right before my eyes for Iona. I could not believe such wickedness, and ran along the shore from rock to rock, crying on them piteously. Even after they were out of reach of my voice, I still cried and waved to them, and when they were quite gone, I thought my heart would only have burst. All the time of my troubles I wept only twice. Once, when I could not reach the yard, and now, the second time, when these fishers turned a deaf ear to my cries. But this time I wept and roared like a wicked child, tearing up the turf with my nails and grinding my face into the earth. If a wish could kill men, those 2 fishers would never have seen morning, and I should likely have died upon my island. When I was a little over my anger, I must eat again, but with such loathing of the mess as I could now scarce control. Sure enough, I should have done as well to fast, for my fishers poisoned me again. I had all my first pains. My throat was so sore I could scarce swallow. I had a fit of strong shuddering which clucked my teeth together, and there came on me that dreadful sense of illness which we have no name for either in Scotch or English. I thought I should have died and made my peace with God, forgiving all men, even my uncle and the fishers. As soon as I had thus made up my mind to the worst, clearness came upon me. I observed the night was falling dry. My clothes were dried a good deal. Truly, I was in a better case than ever before, since I had landed on the isle, and so I got to sleep at last, with a thought of gratitude. The next day, which was the 4th of this horrible life of mine, I found my bodily strength run very low. But the sun shone, the air was sweet, and what I managed to eat of the shellfish agreed well with me and revived my courage. I was scarce back on my rock, where I went always the first thing after I had eaten, before I observed a boat coming down the sound, and with her head, as I thought, in my direction. I began at once to hope and fear exceedingly, for I thought these men might have thought better of their cruelty in be coming back to my assistance. But another disappointment, such as yesterday's, was more than I could bear. I turned my back accordingly upon the sea, and did not look again till I had counted many hundreds. The boat was still heading for the island. The next time I counted the full 1,000 as slowly as I could, my heart beating so as to hurt me. And then it was out of all question. She was coming straight to Erid. I could no longer hold myself back, and ran to the seaside and out from one rock to another as far as I could go. It is a marvel I was not drowned, for when I was brought to a stand at last, my legs shook under me, and my mouth was so dry I must wet it with the sea-water before I was able to shout. All this time the boat was coming on, and now I was able to perceive it was the same boat and the same 2 men as yesterday. This I knew by their hair, which the one of had a bright yellow and the other black. But now there was a 3rd man along with them, who looked to be of a better class. As soon as they were come within easy speech, they let down their sail and lay quiet. In spite of my supplications, they drew no nearer in, and what frightened me most of all, the new man tee-heed with laughter as he talked and looked at me. Then he stood up in the boat and addressed me a long while, speaking fast and with many wavings of his hand. I told him I had no Gaelic, and at this he became very angry, and I began to suspect he thought he was talking English. Listening very close, I caught the word whatever several times, but all the rest was Gaelic and might have been Greek and Hebrew for me. Whatever, said I to show him I had caught the word. Yes, says he, and then he looked at the other men, as much as to say, I told you I spoke English, and began again as hard as ever in the Gaelic. This time I picked out another word, tide, and then I had a flash of hope. I remembered he was always waving his hand toward the mainland of the Ross. Do you mean when the tide is out? I cried, and could not finish. Yes, said he, tide. At that, I turned tail upon their boat, where my adviser had once more begun to tee-hee with laughter, leaped back the way I had come, from one stone to another, and set off running across the isle as I had never run before. In about half an hour I came out upon the shores of the creek, and, sure enough, it was shrunk into a little trickle of water, through which I dashed not above my knees, and landed with a shout on the main island. A sea-bred boy would not have stayed a day on Erid, which is only what they call a tidal islet, and except in the bottom of the neaps can be entered and left twice in every 24 hours, either dry-shod or at the most by wading. Even I, who had the tide going out and in before me in the bay, and even watched for the ebbs the better to get my shellfish, even I say, if I had sat down to think, instead of raging at my fate, must have soon guessed the secret and got free. It was no wonder the fishers had not understood me. The wonder was rather that they had ever guessed my pitiful illusion and taken the trouble to come back. I had starved with cold and hunger on that island for close upon 100 hours. But for the fishers, I might have left my bones there in pure folly. And even as it was, I had paid for it pretty dear, not only in past sufferings, but in my present case. Being clothed like a beggar man, scarce able to walk, and in great pain of my sore throat. I have seen wicked men and fools, a great many of both, and I believe they both get paid in the end, but the fools first. And that brings us to the end of, well, the end of the first part, and if I'm honest, I am feeling extremely tired and kind of struggling with this more than I thought I would. So I apologise for doing this, but I think I'm actually going to end the stream there rather than take a break and go on to the second half, because I feel like I'm falling asleep and struggling to get the sentences right. Plus my throat is extremely dry. Like, you know, it's on topic, I am also extremely thirsty. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've been getting what feels like a lot of rest. The thing, I feel like I could probably push myself on for the second half, but yeah, I'm finding it more difficult than I thought I would. So, yeah, I mean, that feels like a decent point to end it anyway. David has learned a valuable lesson about tides, and to be honest, who among us would not have also briefly forgotten for the spell of 4 days that tides exist, and it might have been possible to walk across? I don't know. But it's almost comical the way that plays out, except for the sheer misery and anguish that he undergoes in the process. So, you know, there you go. Right, is Dave still going? Okay, well then I'm gonna wrap things up early. I'm gonna send you over to Dave. From Kentucky, tides are entirely theoretical for you? Fair. I mean, I'm from, like, one of the furthest points from any sea. Not now, but used to be, from like one of the furthest points from any sea in England that you could get. Like, slap bang in the middle. Equidistant from everywhere nautical. So, you know, I can relate. But yeah, that's the end of that. Thank you for being here and listening. Go over to Dave, enjoy the Planet Zoo that he is doing. I'm not entirely sure what Lucy's schedule is for the week. I'm assuming she's intending to read on Wednesday, but keep an eye on the Discord for notifications about that. I'm sure we will let you know. I'm hoping to be back next Saturday. I don't think I've got anything else going on, but if I do, I will also let you know, where we will continue with this. But in the meantime, thank you all for being here. You've been a wonderful, lovely audience. We always appreciate having people turn out to listen, and we will see you on the next one. Have a lovely rest of the weekend. Goodbye and good night.